The second I walked through those double doors, she laughed. It wasn't loud. It wasn't even particularly mean on the surface, but every guy knows that laugh. The one that says you were always the weak one. The one that says you don't belong here anymore. She turned her head just enough for me to catch it, like I was supposed to pretend I didn't hear. And then, of course, he leaned in, her shiny new litigation lapdog of a husband, and muttered, "Jesus, didn't know they let charity cases file motions now." I walked right past them, didn't blink, didn't flinch. Black tie, no label. Suit tailored in silence. No lawyer trailing me. No assistant. Not even a pen in my hand. That courtroom had seen too many broken men try to act whole. They shuffle in, with binders, desperation in their pockets, and the stench of "please just be fair." I brought none of that. I brought silence. I brought weight. Still, the clerk didn't even look up. She stamped something, handed a file to a bailiff, and said, "Let's move it along." That's when the judge walked in. He wasn't some wide-eyed newbie. This guy had 25 years of watching people gut each other with smiles and subpoenas. He adjusted his robe, glanced at the bench, looked at me, and stopped. Not a pause, a freeze. The little stack of folders in his hand slipped just a bit. He reached for his glasses like maybe they were betraying him. His voice came out dry, low, not meant for the mic. "Dear God, is that really him?" The room changed. You could feel it. Even the fluorescent lights felt different. Her husband straightened in his seat. The clerk suddenly blinked like she'd just woken up. A bailiff's hand twitched toward his hip. I heard one of the interns, who'd been chewing gum like a cow in the gallery, actually gasp. And then came the silence. Because now, every person in that room was looking at me. Not at the poor bastard who'd lost everything 3 years ago. Not at the man she used to mock for his emotional fragility. No. They were looking at someone whose name had just pulled a tremor out of a federal judge. She turned fully now. No more half laughs. Her eyes narrowed, lips tightened. She was calculating, running every possibility in her head. That's when I smiled. Just a little. Just enough for her to know that her math was outdated. Oh, and if you're following this, don't just scroll past. More than 90% of the people reading these never hit follow. But if you do, it tells the team to keep digging deeper, because we're only just getting started. And trust me, it gets darker. She whispered something to her husband. He didn't answer, just stared at me like I'd grown a second head, or maybe like he finally realized I'd always had one, and he was just late to the unveiling. The judge cleared his throat. "Petitioner present?" I didn't say yes. I just stepped forward and laid a single sheet of paper on the table. No folders, no briefcase. That's when her husband flinched, not because of what was on the paper, but because of the watermark. You see, there are firms, and then there are circles. Most lawyers live in the first. A few, very few, ever get invited to the second. And her husband just realized he's been playing chess against someone who owns the board manufacturer. The court recorder blinked. She leaned forward slightly, as if she wanted to ask me to repeat my name, just to be sure. She didn't. Nobody did, because suddenly none of them wanted to seem like they didn't know who I was. And that's the funny thing about erasure. When you walk away quietly, they assume you were erased. But some of us don't vanish. We just move where your searchlights don't reach. The rest of the hearing hadn't even started. But the verdict, the one that mattered, was already written in the way she stopped smiling. And this was just the entrance. And 3 years ago, I sat in that same courtroom and the bailiff didn't even bother announcing my name. He just looked down at the floor like he was embarrassed for me. My lawyer, some court-appointed grease stain named Palmer, had already sweated through his collar before we even sat down. Across from me, she wore white. White, like this was a wedding reception and not a legal mugging. Her lawyer called me volatile and unmoored, financially unstable, and my favorite, professionally irrelevant. He said it like he was complimenting me, voice all smooth and faux sympathetic, like I just hope the court takes into account his emotional distress when evaluating asset distribution. Translation? Give her everything. He's too soft to fight. And I didn't. She wanted the house. Sure, the BMW, whatever. 70% of the retirement? Fine. She even asked for the dog. I didn't say a word. Didn't blink. just nodded and signed. I remember her expression, that little lip twitch, like she wasn't sure if she should feel victorious or worried I wasn't putting up a fight, like I was ruining her satisfaction by refusing to bleed where she could see it. That's the thing about people like her. If you don't scream, they don't know where to stab next. They thought I was broken. Hell, I let them think that, because while they were tallying up what I'd lost, I was already burning what I never planned to keep. I walked out of court with a canvas duffel bag, 2 suits I kept because they fit, and a single navy blue folder tucked under my arm, the same one her lawyer had mocked earlier in the hall with a smirk. "Hope that's not your resume, pal." It wasn't. It was a draft, not a legal document, not a will, just one unsigned, dated board resolution, corporate minutia, if you didn't know what you were looking at. But the signature line at the bottom, that line was blank for a reason. It was waiting. Not for her, not for the court, for the one person left in my life who hadn't forgotten what I was capable of. Before all this, I used to build things people couldn't trace. Architected systems under other names. I was the guy CEOs whispered about when the press asked who ran the back end of their infrastructure. But I walked away from that world, got married, thought I wanted to live slower. She hated that version of me. Boring, too humble, not ambitious anymore. So I gave her what she wanted, the newer, shinier version of ambition, wrapped in a divorce decree and a full-blown legal collapse. But what nobody realized that day, especially not her, was that the folder didn't contain my past. It contained the first draft of my re-entry. 3 weeks later, I was gone. No announcements, no goodbye email, just a forwarding address that led to a P.O. box in a fishing town with 1 gas station and 0 bars with Wi-Fi. I didn't tell a soul. Even the guy who picked me up at the bus station thought I was a travel writer doing a piece on the death of small-town America. You ever lose everything and feel nothing? Not numbness. Nothing. Like your nervous system just left the chat. That's where I was. But that emptiness, it's useful because there's no noise left when you're rebuilding from ash. No one to impress, no illusions to maintain, just a clean folder and the will to make the next version of yourself completely unrecognizable to the ones who wrote you off. That courtroom never saw a fight because I wasn't fighting over what was being taken. I was just giving them enough rope. You'd miss the town if you blinked, not metaphorically, literally. Take the wrong exit off the coastal highway and you're back on the interstate before you realize that smudge of rusted boats and sagging porches was an actual zip code. No tourists, no strip malls, just sea wind, dogs without leashes, and a diner that still used a cash register from the Reagan era. That's where I went, not to hide, to dissolve. I checked into a roadside motel under the name Graham Wells. No history, no LinkedIn, no paper trail. Paid in cash, answered no questions. The lady behind the desk didn't care, just pointed at room 3 and told me to jiggle the handle a bit if it stuck. I didn't talk to anyone for 6 weeks. I bought a burner laptop at a pawn shop and used it to locate an old acquaintance of mine from my back-end security days, someone who owed me a favor, not money, a favor, the kind that doesn't expire. I told him I wanted a clean LLC, offshore back-end, full ownership through a 2-layer proxy trust. No links to my name, no flags, just a key card, a bank account, and time. He didn't ask why. There was a shipping logistics firm in town, dying. 2 brothers had started it after inheriting their dad's boat repair business. They didn't understand software, but they knew cargo delays and missed payments were killing them. I offered to consult, fix their invoicing automation in 3 days, streamline their inventory logging with a custom patch I'd written years ago for a completely different industry. They offered me equity. I declined, took a seat on the board instead, under an alias, of course. Over the next 8 months, I rewired their entire operation. Quietly, no press, no funding rounds, just functionality. I replaced their external vendors with smaller ones I bought anonymously through the trust, changed their payment gateways, introduced blockchain tracking, not for hype, but to quietly log every error and prove fault when contracts failed. Clients noticed. Growth ticked, then spiked. The brothers didn't ask questions. Just called me the quiet guy who makes our problems disappear. I stayed in room 3 for 9 months. Never changed it. Every morning I ran a script across a private network. Not for surveillance. For detection. I wanted to know the second my name came up in any active or pending case file. It never did. They'd moved on. That was her flaw. She thought the silence meant defeat. She didn't understand the silence was the sound of compounding interest. I bought the motel 6 months in, not directly, through a shell that held a property group I acquired during a quiet bankruptcy auction. Didn't even step foot in the manager's office, just changed who got the rent checks. I didn't need the money, I needed the structure. Something stable enough to stand on, but invisible enough to stay beneath notice. Then came the trust proxies. 2 legal entities in Delaware, one in Nevada, one in Belize, each layered to obfuscate ownership through nested trustees, but each had a golden share, mine, a mechanism not even the board could overwrite. It gave me 51% control in the event of fraud, insolvency, or major reputational risk. Risk like, say, a new husband who tied his firm to aggressive litigation strategies against people with better lawyers than he realized. I built the whole thing not as revenge, but as reclamation, a new ecosystem where I was untouchable. No press releases, no photos, no headlines, just wires, transfers, leverage. At the diner, they knew me as Graham, the guy who tipped too much and drank his coffee black. What they didn't know was that Graham held ownership stakes in 6 logistics platforms, 3 automation vendors, 2 maritime insurance firms, and a silent controlling interest in a legal AI startup whose primary client was her new husband's firm. I became the quiet variable in their perfectly balanced spreadsheet of lies. And while they toasted their power over steaks in some urban rooftop bar, I sat on the pier eating fried cod from a paper tray, watching the tide roll in. It wasn't just escape, it was rebirth, brick by brick, algorithm by algorithm. And the name they thought they'd buried, it was already signing things again, just not where they were looking. The first one was easy. Too easy, honestly. They were a mid-sized document processing vendor, handled back-end case file ingestion for several boutique law firms, including one that just happened to subcontract regularly with his. A little late-night diligence, some light pressure on an over-leveraged shareholder, and suddenly one of my shells, registered innocuously under a fisheries logistics trust, had a 27% stake. From there, it was just chess, not fast, precise, one quiet piece at a time. 18 months. That's how long it took to install myself inside the bloodstream of their empire. Not directly, of course. Direct is traceable. Direct leaves fingerprints. I went through forgotten exits, through subsidiaries with dusty branding, and invoices filed under legacy formats nobody had updated in years. The second vendor was trickier, AI litigation software, fast-growing, messy books, burned through 3 CTOs in 2 years. I knew they'd take money from anywhere that didn't smell like a vulture fund. I made sure I smelled like nothing at all. By the time they noticed, I was already deep in the board, silent shareholder with override provisions buried in the digital rights clause. They never checked. Lawyers like him don't read the fine print when they think they're the ones writing it. And the third, that one was personal. A cybersecurity compliance firm tied directly to a data vault system he had helped implement 2 years earlier. His name was on internal press releases. I cross-referenced their email migration logs and discovered they were still using outdated SHA encryption on archive contracts. Rookie mistake. I acquired them through a proxy buyout during an operational restructuring. The CEO never even realized where the funding originated. I didn't need him to. I just needed access to their audit trails and the metadata they'd been too lazy to purge. Because in that metadata were timestamped emails, auto forwards, legal memos, a trail. Not to her, to him. See, he wasn't just her husband, he was her cleanup crew. She'd married her eraser, thought that by combining their legal arsenals they'd built something invincible. But what they'd actually built was brittle. They used my ruin as their foundation, so I started filing motions. Quiet ones. Procedural, technical, always through third-party counsel, buried in different districts. None of them pointed to me, just little legal paper cuts aimed at their contracts, their filings, their acquisitions, just enough to stall a deal here, trigger a re-review there. It wasn't revenge, it was removal. Strategic disassembly of everything they thought they'd won. Every time they tried to expand, a strange delay occurred. a license check that wasn't returned, a vendor who suddenly needed to pause pending an internal review, compliance audits that exposed minor irregularities, not enough to penalize but enough to scare away bigger clients. I knew exactly how long her firm could hold a poker face. I'd studied it from within before I ever met her. She ran off the assumption that everyone was dumber than her unless they proved otherwise. And when the cracks started to appear, she didn't investigate. She dismissed. Just noise, she probably said. She didn't realize that noise was me, sifting through their foundations like a termite in the walls. And I didn't do it alone. No war is won without a spy. Mine came in the form of a man who once drank whiskey with me at a closed bar in Berlin while we negotiated access terms for a streaming backend nobody remembers now. He owed me. I called it in. He became my mouthpiece, filed the motions, spoke to the intermediaries, sat at the tables I couldn't enter yet, not because I lacked the right, but because the timing wasn't ready. You don't reveal the new blueprint while the old building still stands. You wait until the final support beam groans. She was on vacation in Provence the first time a client pulled out of a merger due to instability in secondary partnerships. He was probably beside her, sipping something expensive and wondering why the emails weren't as confident anymore. And all across their empire, the walls they built with pieces of my old life started to sweat. They thought they'd moved on. They thought I was dust. But termites don't knock. They chew. And I was already in the foundation. She thought she'd won when she bought into the trust. It was during her I'm thriving phase, all brunch selfies and silk blazers. The alimony she bled from me funded her entry into one of those quiet little wealth vaults for the newly moneyed, the Glencairn Private Estate Trust. Exclusive, discreet, perfect for someone who wanted the illusion of old money without the patience to actually earn it. They called it a portfolio forward security ecosystem for high-value members. What that meant in real terms was you park your money there, let them shuffle it across generational assets, and in return, you get dividends, tax shields, and bragging rights at wine bars. She bought her way in like a tourist who thinks fluency comes with a phrase book. And it worked for a while. She liked telling people at fundraisers that she diversified into heritage equity. She loved that the trust board sent her glossy printouts with cursive fonts and pictures of English estates she'd never stepped foot in. She even framed one and hung it in her home office right next to her diploma and a quote about manifesting abundance. She never asked who founded the trust. They never volunteered. And why would they? That was the point. Glencairn was built to obscure ownership. Discretion wasn't a feature. It was the foundation. None of the members knew each other. No one got access to the cap table. Just your private login and a quarterly newsletter with a crest on the envelope. But tucked deep in the original bylaws, beneath the sections on dividend policy and voting rights, was a clause no one ever talked about. Section 9, subsection D. In the event that material fraud, corruption, or legal malpractice is verified against the founder of the trust, any membership acquired through derivative gains involving said founder shall be rendered null with forfeiture of returns and assets held under the trust's umbrella, pending independent arbitration. She never read it. Her financial advisor never flagged it, because no one thought the founder would ever be identified. Until now. Her first clue should have been when her dividend payment froze. Just a technical delay. The email said, standard audit procedures, nothing to worry about. Then came the letter. Not an email. A real letter, couriered to her office with no return address. Inside, a single page, no logo, just a printout of the trust clause, highlighted, one line at the bottom, review your chain of funds. That night, she called her new husband. He brushed it off. Scare tactic, he said, probably someone fishing for a settlement. She nodded, pretended to agree, but I know her. She didn't sleep. Because for someone like her, money isn't comfort. It's identity. And something was tugging at the hem. The second dividend froze a month later. This time, no explanation. Just a login error and a phone line that kept experiencing higher than normal call volumes. She still didn't know. Because even he didn't know. Because not even the trust board knew until recently. You see, the founder had used an alias, a clever one, a Latin variation of a childhood nickname only 2 people in the world ever knew. The trust had been my prototype, a little experiment I designed years before the marriage, before her, back when I still thought the future was a place you built quietly, not a thing you had to steal back. I never activated my founder rights. Not until last winter. One encrypted key, one signature, one buried clause rising to the surface like a landmine under velvet. And the moment that key logged in, Glencairn's system triggered automatic compliance scans on every active member linked to secondary gains. Her name pinged because her buy-in came from funds granted through a divorce settlement, a settlement extracted via legal misrepresentation later connected through metadata trails and motion filings to her new husband's former firm. Derivative gains. Clause 90, she was now sitting on assets she didn't technically own anymore. She didn't know that the trust had already moved her profile to pending arbitration, or that her login had been reassigned to a review queue I controlled. She didn't know that by design, the moment the founder is revealed, all remaining privileges of compromised members can be revoked without board vote. And when she finds out, really finds out, it won't come through a lawyer. It'll come when she tries to sell her access rights to fund a house remodel and the transfer fails. When the buyer's attorney informs her the shares are under dispute. When she calls the trust and no one answers because their legal counsel has been rerouted quietly to a different firm, mine. She played the long game with the man she thought she'd erased, but the truth is, she never read the rules of the game, because I wrote them. The moment she saw him, her face broke. Not dramatically, just a twitch, an involuntary microspasm around the eyes that betrayed years of practiced calm. You don't forget someone who once sat across your kitchen table eating fig tarts while drafting clauses to help protect your long-term financial legacy. He was seated to my left. Calm, crisp gray suit, legal pad unopened, hands folded. He hadn't aged much, just carried himself differently now. Less deferential, more deliberate. She blinked twice before she leaned over and whispered to her husband, "He can't represent him. Conflict of interest." Her husband didn't answer right away, didn't even look at her. Then, without turning, he said, "He doesn't need to represent him. He already did, 10 years ago, before you ever met him." And just like that, her world cracked at the base. See, back before she played country club chess with alimony payouts and trust funds, I had my own counsel, not for flashy lawsuits or publicity stunts, for the kind of work you only plan if you know someday someone will try to strip you down. He helped me draft contingencies, exit clauses, ghost ownership templates, and a little-known mechanism in a dormant partnership agreement, an agreement she'd never seen but whose ripples she'd been living in for years. She'd fired him after the divorce, of course, thought he was too quiet, too risk-averse. Translation, he didn't cheerlead her tactics or massage the numbers the way her new husband's boutique firm liked to. What she didn't know? He never left my orbit. He just went subterranean. That's the thing about lawyers like him. The good ones don't pick sides. They pick legacies. And mine had just walked into court beside me, her husband's face turned ghost white. Because he knew what a lawyer like that represented, knew what it meant that he was here, not as an attorney of record, not as a consultant, as a witness. Because 10 years ago, that man didn't just advise me, he helped build the trust architecture that she now sat atop like a queen on a throne bolted to a trapdoor. He helped write the clause on Clause 9D, and now, 10 years later, he wasn't here to argue. He was here to confirm. Her husband leaned in then, voice low but clipped. "What exactly did he build for you?" I didn't turn, didn't smirk, just said, "What didn't he?" And the silence that followed did more than any motion on record. She suddenly didn't know where the floor ended anymore, because everything she thought was hers, everything she leaned on, boasted about, built atop a narrative of conquest, was now subject to something older than her marriage, older than her fake reinvention. She'd married into a chessboard where half the pieces were already marked. I watched the realization unfold across her face. First the confusion, how could I have known this long, orchestrated so much? Then the fear, what else had I prepared for? That's when the real fun began, because as the hearing moved forward and she tried to regain control with that brittle, performative charm of hers, the judge asked my consultant to clarify a few technical matters, just clarification, not representation. And each time he spoke, her posture shifted a little further inward, not because of what he said, but because of how casually he said it, like he wasn't introducing new information, just reminding everyone what had always been true, things she'd never known existed, things her current husband had assured her were impossible. Because her husband? for all his bluster and boutique litigation swagger, had never dug into my past. He thought erasing someone was a matter of paperwork and reputation management, but I didn't vanish. I distributed. And now, the man she once thought was her ally, the one who toasted her financial future over artisanal whiskey, was calmly, methodically testifying to a time before her name ever entered my story. Layer by layer, her curated life began to unravel, and the best part, none of it was new. She was just the last to find out. It came in a plain manila folder, no labels, no binder clips, no dramatic thud when it hit the table. Just a quiet, deliberate slide across polished wood from my counsel to the judge. The court clerk reached for it out of reflex, hesitated, then looked to the judge like she wasn't sure if she should touch it, because there's something about true danger, real, institutional danger, that doesn't announce itself. It doesn't need volume. It doesn't swagger. It sits still, perfectly calm, like a predator that knows it already bit the artery. The judge opened it, 1 page in, his eyes narrowed. 3 pages in, he adjusted his glasses. By page 6, he stopped reading entirely and just looked at her, not with sympathy, not with confusion, with the slow, stunned recognition of a man who just realized the trial he thought he was presiding over wasn't the real event. It was the smokescreen. Her lawyer shifted uncomfortably. Her husband leaned forward, scanning the bench like he might be able to see what was on the page from 50 feet away. She sat frozen, but I could see the twitch in her left hand. I remembered that twitch from our marriage. She used to get it when she sensed she'd said one sentence too many during dinner parties. The judge set the packet down like it was radioactive. Then he asked the only question that mattered. Is this man prepared to testify in federal review? The courtroom went silent, thick and electric. Even the humming HVAC seemed to pause. I stood, straightened my jacket, met the judge's eyes. I am. Her husband's reaction was the first crack. He flinched, subtle but clear, because he knew what that meant. He knew what was in those sealed settlements, the retroactive claims, the offshore filings hidden under layers of billing automation and third-party advisement. He'd signed off on the acquisition strategies. He'd structured the payouts. And somewhere in that folder, buried in all the paperwork they assumed was buried for good, was a pattern, a trail of manipulation, concealment, and fiduciary misconduct. He'd built his name on silence. And now that silence was being weaponized against him. The judge didn't ask for clarification. He just nodded once gravely and placed the folder to the side with a care that said, "This is going places far beyond this courtroom." That's when her voice broke in. "This is irrelevant," she said too loudly. "This isn't even about..." The judge raised a hand. She stopped mid-sentence. "Counsel," he said, eyes fixed on her husband now. "You're aware of the implications of sealed settlements in federal review proceedings?" He nodded slowly. "Yes, Your Honor." "And that by failing to disclose them in prior filings before this court, you've opened both parties to potential censure and investigation?" Silence. Her husband stared down at the table. That silence was his answer. The air turned to glass. Cold, sharp, and shatterable. This was the moment it flipped, where the power dynamic didn't just shift, it imploded. Because for the first time since this entire performance started, she wasn't the woman who took everything from me. She wasn't the clever, cunning ex-wife with a new life and a smug little empire. She was now collateral. And she knew it. The panic didn't show all at once. Not like it does in movies. It seeped in slow, through the tightening jaw, the darting glances at the court reporter, the subtle grip on her own forearm like she was trying to anchor herself. She turned to him, her perfect husband, her cleanup crew, the man who made all her messes go away with just enough technicality to keep her hands clean. He wouldn't look at her. She leaned closer, whispered something. His lips moved but didn't speak, because now he was protecting himself. And her, she was just part of the body count. The judge announced a recess, but nobody moved. Not really, because something had shifted in the room. Some invisible social current. Spectators started whispering. A couple of clerks exchanged looks. Even the bailiff glanced toward me, not like a guard scanning a threat, but like a man starting to wonder if the guy in the suit across the aisle had been holding the detonator this entire time. I sat down again, calm. She didn't, because she understood now, finally, that this wasn't about clawing back assets or filing revisions. It was about control, and she had none, not anymore. She didn't move during the recess. Not at first. When the judge left the bench, the courtroom didn't erupt into the usual shuffle of lawyers gathering their papers or clerks quietly rechecking their logs. No, this time it was whispers. Low, persistent, building whispers. From the gallery, from the interns along the wall. Even the court security, who usually stood like statues, exchanged a glance that felt like a verdict of its own. She just stood there, not straight, rigid, frozen in that awful in-between posture of someone who hasn't figured out if they're embarrassed, confused, or terrified. He leaned in, her husband, who up until that moment had been the confident center of gravity in her performance. His voice was low, sharp, audible only because the whole room was listening now. "You need to walk this back. Now." She turned toward him, slowly, like her neck had forgotten how it worked. Her expression cracked for the first time. Not rage, not even fear. Panic. I don't know what's happening," she said. "Then shut up until I do," he snapped, barely moving his lips. That was the moment the room turned, not because of what was said, but because of who they had become. You could feel it, a shift in the gaze of every onlooker, from curiosity to quiet contempt, the kind of disdain reserved for those who used to sit on a pedestal until the world realized the marble was just painted plaster, because she wasn't the composed ex-wife anymore. The one with the polished statement earrings and curated grief. Now she was just another party trying not to drown in paperwork she never bothered to read. The judge returned, looked older, as if reading through that manila folder had removed something from him. She stood before he could sit. "Your Honor, I'd like to formally request a continuance so we may adequately review." "Denied," he said, cutting her off mid-sentence. No apology, no explanation. Just a firm, final syllable that landed like a steel door shutting. "Proceed." She tried again, softer this time. "We believe there are procedural inconsistencies that..." The judge didn't even raise his hand this time, just looked past her like she was scenery. "Counsel for petitioner, please continue." And just like that, she vanished, not physically, but structurally. She wasn't a person anymore in that room. She was paperwork, a name on a form, a data point in a string of bad decisions. The story wasn't hers now, it was mine, and everyone knew it. Her husband sat back down, rubbing the bridge of his nose, didn't offer her a chair, didn't even glance at her, because now he was calculating how much damage he could limit, how many boards he'd have to step down from, whether the settlements could stay buried if they just offered the right scapegoat. Her. It had been subtle at first, the whispers, the sideways looks, but now it was open. A clerk openly typed something while shaking her head. A young woman in the gallery pulled out her phone, thumb hovering like she was ready to Google a name she suddenly realized mattered. And still she stood there, like someone waiting for a bus that had already crashed 5 miles away. What collapsed wasn't her finances, not yet. It was her illusion of agency, because until that day, she thought she could pivot her way out of anything, reframe, rebrand, talk louder, and dress better until the facts got bored and left. But facts don't get bored. They wait. And now they had a voice and a face. Mine. I didn't gloat. I didn't smirk. I didn't need to, because her desperation had finally ripened into recognition. She finally understood this wasn't a chess match. This was sentencing, not legal, existential, of every lie she built on the assumption that I wouldn't survive long enough to speak. And now I wasn't just speaking, I was being heard. The judge didn't clear his throat, didn't shuffle papers, didn't look over his glasses with that slow, theatrical sigh judges love when they're about to issue a harsh but fair rebuke. He just leaned forward, his elbows on the bench, his eyes fixed on her like a doctor delivering a terminal diagnosis. Clinical, detached, already beyond hope. "In light of these revelations," he began, his voice lower than before, steadier somehow, "this court no longer views the petitioner as a dependent seeking asset reconciliation." She inhaled sharply, like she could preempt the blow with breath alone. Her hand reached out, reflexively, to the table, like balance had become a luxury. But as a materially injured party with suppressed legal standing resulting from prolonged misrepresentation, fraud by omission, and collusion between secondary entities, her head shook, not a no shake, a child shake, the kind that tries to wave away thunder by pretending it's not real. The judge wasn't finished. Accordingly, this court will refer Exhibits 5 through 9, along with the attached sealed documentation to the State Bar and the Ethics Commission for immediate independent review. No one spoke. Then she gasped, not dramatic, not a wail, just the sound a person makes when the air leaves the room and doesn't come back. Her husband didn't move. He knew. Because sealed exhibits meant more than embarrassment. They meant professional exposure. They meant depositions, subpoenas, review boards, and in his world, the world of curated reputations and strategic silence, a single sentence from the Ethics Commission could kill a career faster than any jury. She tried to speak then. Just a name, maybe, or a plea, or a question, but the words never formed. They stumbled out like broken keys from a jammed piano. Your Honor, this isn't... The judge looked at her, not unkindly, but with a calm finality that said he'd already seen too many people try to wriggle back through doors they'd locked themselves. This court is no longer hearing arguments, he said simply, and that was the moment it hit her, not the verdict, the irrelevance. She wasn't even part of the conversation anymore. She was a case number, a file being routed to agencies that didn't know her name, didn't care about her justifications, didn't have time for her curated sob stories and curated power couple facade. This was no longer hers to spin. It was a system now, a gear she couldn't jam. I didn't look at her. I didn't need to. I felt it. The unraveling, the collapse of the scaffolding she'd built to tower over me. I just looked forward, neutral, controlled, no smile, just the smallest nod, like someone acknowledging the truth of gravity. She gripped the edge of the table like it might argue on her behalf, but nothing spoke, not even her husband, who now sat with both hands in his lap, staring down at nothing. She looked at him. He didn't look back. He was calculating exit strategies, damage control, narrative pivots. He was already thinking about what he'd say on a phone call later that night that would start with, "We may have an exposure problem." But she wasn't an exposure. She was the liability. And for the first time, she knew it. Because the tools she'd always used, manipulation, charm, weaponized incompetence, they don't work when the court stops viewing you as a person with context and starts treating you like an equation with a correction pending. There was no drama after that, no scene, just the sound of a gavel striking wood. Once. Final. I didn't rush. While she sat slumped in her chair, mascara flecked into the corners of her eyes, and her husband hunched over his phone like maybe a screen could offer salvation, I just stood, straightened my jacket, adjusted my cufflinks, reached out, and shook the clerk's hand. Firm, polite. She blinked in surprise, not because of the gesture, because the judge had stood too, and said, in front of the entire room, "Thank you for your candor, sir." That one word was a fuse. No one missed it. Not the court reporter who glanced up, suddenly alert. Not the clerk, whose handshake shifted from polite to something resembling respect. Not the interns, who until that moment had been scrolling their phones like this was another day of stale litigation. I turned and walked down the aisle. No entourage, no comments, just the click of shoes on cheap government flooring and the feeling, not of victory, but of detachment, like I had finally, cleanly stepped out of the story she tried to write about me. The courtroom doors opened. Flash, one photo, unplanned, caught mid-step, sunglasses in hand, tie loosened just enough to suggest this wasn't the first room I'd taken apart. Reporters didn't recognize me, not right away. One asked, "Do you have a statement about the exhibits submitted today?" I said nothing. Another tried a different angle. "Are you representing any entities under review?" Still nothing. It wasn't stonewalling. It was irrelevance. Their questions weren't caught up yet. They were still chasing smoke, not realizing the fire had already moved on. I walked past them, down the steps, onto the street. Sunlight, finally. The kind of cold sun that doesn't warm you, just makes your silhouette a little sharper. That photo, the one outside the courthouse, it hit Twitter 12 minutes later. A journalist posted it with the caption, "Why did the judge call this man, sir?" Within an hour, legal forms started pinging. Background checks, cross-referenced business filings. A shell company's board, minutes from 5 years ago, suddenly got 1,300 views. Someone pulled an old photo from a corporate retreat in Amsterdam. Cropped, blurry, but the posture was the same. It didn't take long. You can hide in plain sight for a decade if you plan it right. But once the dots connect, they don't unconnect. They ignite. She wouldn't see the full fallout until days later. Not in headlines. Those would come too. She'd feel it first in calls unreturned, in bank freezes, in a cascade of "we regret to inform you" emails that all landed with the same polite precision she used to wield. I crossed the street, calm, traffic slowed. Not for me, but because people were looking now. One intern, probably sent to get coffee or file something meaningless before realizing he'd just witnessed an extinction event, jogged to catch up with me. "Excuse me, sir. What's your name?" I stopped, looked him in the eye, no grin, no cinematic pause, just clarity, and I said it, for the record, out loud, and the crowd behind him, phones raised now, stopped moving, because names have gravity, and when it drops, it lands everywhere. The man they laughed at, dismissed, erased, underestimated, he didn't disappear. He waited until their arrogance became admissible evidence, until silence turned into strategy, until a single word, "sir," was all it took to remind the room who they'd actually been sitting across from, not a broken man, a buried one. And now he was walking, out, forward, untouched, unbothered, unstoppable.